balkanization is an actual geopolitical term that describes many warring nations that kind of fall apart from the larger whole. And that geopolitical term is crafted out of our situation. So you become known for certain, as a nation, you become known, or as a geographical location, I guess, you become known for something that's kind of negative.
Yeah.
And so that's a part that's kind of interesting, and I try to find dark humor in it in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I think of my parents' generation, and they are born in that kind of almost for half of their life lucky, but for the second half of their life unlucky space, where they were in a model of a new nation that was created post World War II and Yugoslavia, and it was this kind of celebrated unity of the nations that in the past were at each other's throats. And then, of course, it only took geologically a blink of 50 years for that to start, falling apart again.
Welcome to the show, Daniel.
Thank you.
So glad to have you on. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry I cut you off there. Go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, I'm really glad to have this opportunity to have this conversation.
Of course, I've been diving into your world, and you have some great stuff, and you kind of your topics seem to vary a little bit, but there's something that connects it all together, which we were kind of discussing before this show. So I'm really excited to have you on. I think you're going to be a great addition to the program that we do here. And so before we get started and jump into any of that amazing work, go ahead and take a moment and introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, thank you. I'm Daniel Kariko, and I've been professor now of photography for quite a bit, for 25 years this year. Wow. So it's been a while. It's one of those moments that you wake up one day and go like, I've been doing this for a while. So I'm originally from Yugoslavia, from now Serbia, and I started my sort of photographic journey when I was 10 in the town of Novi Sad in Serbia, and I moved to United States to complete my high school education, and then sort of it went from there. I was supposed to be an engineer, and I ended up going to the darkroom side.
Hey, a little dark side's not bad. I'm just kidding.
But as an introduction, as you will probably see from my work, I've always maintained that kind of connection with science and with sort of real world ideas and problems and all of that. So yeah, it's that's kind of me in a nutshell. I teach and I teach at East Carolina University in North Carolina now. After about 8 years in Florida, about 14 years ago. Wow. And I also spend a lot of time actually administrating the School of Art and Design. I function as a assistant director for the undergraduate studies.
Oh, that's amazing. That's great. I'm thinking East Carolina. What's their mascot?
It's a pirate.
They got pretty famous because of a football game a few years back. They knocked off a big team. Yeah, I just remember going Eastern Carolina. All right, all right. But no, it's amazing. Um, well, what I was going to say here is, I guess my first question is you said it you started photographing or started kind of getting into photography when you were 10 years old, and so talk to me a little bit about that. What pulled you into photography at 10 years old?
It was my teacher at the time, Oliveira. Um, and so it was kind of a funny story, and as you will probably see through this conversation, I kind of fall into things. Uh,
I have a feeling. Yeah.
um, I this was a fourth grade, and I was, I think, misbehaving in the class. And in order for her to kind of manage me, I think she didn't allow me to go to the long recess. That's kind of that middle of the day break. But she also had to develop some photographs, and so we were one of those tiny little elementary schools that had the functioning darkroom, and I think she was mostly running the whole thing.
Wow.
And that was my first introduction. So instead of going to recess, I had to basically just kind of sit in the darkroom and watch her develop film, or maybe even print something. And of course, as a 10-year-old, this was not a punishment. This was like, oh, this is amazing. Are you kidding me? Can I get into this? So yeah, I ended up actually becoming, I think, the first and maybe only member of the photo club.
A founding and only member of the photo club. Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, I just remember walking around with a little Russian 35 millimeter camera, taking photographs of maybe events around school. We didn't. I don't think we had a newspaper or anything like that. But of course, it was one of those things that just kind of stuck with me. And my dad was also into photography. He always had to have one of the 35 millimeter cameras. You know, that was like a sort of a type of prestige in Serbia. We bought probably a dozen, or at least half a dozen of the sort of used Russian cameras on flea markets, and ended up kind of photographing along the way. Um, at that time, you were kind of, you would develop the film, or you would have the color film developed, and you would have the um, one child's birthday, and then Christmas, and then maybe a winter vacation on the single roll, because you just didn't take that many
Yeah,
images.
for sure.
And so when I started photographing kind of landscape, or a weird, interesting thing that I found, it was always like, why are you wasting film on something that's not us?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was my start in photography, and then I got into one of those vocational schools, and there was mechanical engineering kind of technician school. So I got a lot of background in technical drawing through my time there, and sort of seeing things in three dimensions, looking at how forces affect gears and those types of things. But photography always kind of remained a part of that. And when I moved to United States, I sort of slowly crept over to the art school side, thinking in the first semester or so that I was going to do double major, but then engineering became kind of a little bit less interesting, and you know photography became more interesting in that case.
It makes sense. You know, what's funny is I can imagine you as a 10-year-old, you know, kind of watching that image, that latent image come out and just going, whoa. You know, as an adult, it still has the same magic. But as a 10-year-old, it's like, what is this witchcraft? Yeah, no, I can imagine. That's a good story. So your dad had a camera. Was anybody artistic in the family, or was it just you that kind of was getting pulled in this direction?
Well, speaking of latent, I think they were latently artistic. um, my parents were that generation after the World War II. They were meant to kind of do the right thing. They were meant to. I was raised by a doctor and a lawyer, so I don't know that they appreciated a lot of art, but I think it was kind of imposed on them that proper things to do were like white collar work, right?
Yeah.
And I sort of rebelled a little bit against that.
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. I'm always curious, you know, some people, and it seems more often than not that you know, people that I interview, they'll say that I'm the black sheep, you know, I'm the one that kind of went this direction. There's only been a few times where it felt like it was something that was handed down, you know, like it was something that was a part of the family. And so like I'm always curious. And you know, this is kind of, you know, I guess with the limited data set that I have here, I can make an analysis, but it's interesting to kind of see where those origins come from. So you stood like young, you had a vocational school, like an engineering vocational school, because United States doesn't do it like that. I don't think it's more general. So you were kind of getting the seeds of engineering planted at that time.
Yeah, from age 14. So you're kind of starting off like it's very practical, pragmatic way.
Yeah, that's kind of smart, don't you think? I'm like, yeah. But you know, so when you switched to the United States, is that where? No, I'm trying to understand. Was it in Serbia that you went to the vocational school, or was it here, or in the not here? I'm in France, but in the United States.
It was definitely in Serbia. Thanks, Marco, for clarification with that. And by the time I traveled to United States, which was right after the war, in where sort of Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian war, all of that. So in '94, I got the opportunity to travel to the United States, and of course, that was for the remainder of my senior year in high school.
Oh wow! Okay.
And I traveled up. I was 17, and so I ended up in this family in Louisiana as an exchange student. Gotcha. And went to a public school in Louisiana, and of course, it was just the most sort of generic public school, which was helpful because my English wasn't that developed, and learning all of that new in English was enough of an adjustment, right?
Yeah. Louisiana has its own accent too. You know, they have their own kind of dialect for sure. And so, yeah. It's definitely that Cajun, you know, that Cajun kind of sound. I love it, actually. I love going to New Orleans and stuff like that. It's a wonderful place. But so let me. I'm trying to follow your track here a little bit. So after you got here, you finished high school. Did you? I'm trying to see how science kind of made its way in. Did you pursue a science degree after, or how did you get into photography? And talk to me about that little track. I'm sure you thought about college, of course. And so talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I was in Louisiana in this family, and I was looking at where should I go to college. Right, my high school was finishing, and the local university Nichols State University in Thibodaux, Louisiana. Um, they had one of those like come and visit us type of programs for the high school students, and of course, one of the stops was at the School of Art and Design. And I remember asking the chair of the program who was giving us a tour, and we were in the gallery. And this was something completely new to me because the public high school didn't have really art program. It had sort of art appreciation, but I was always trying.
Oh, isn't it strange? Yeah.
And of course, immediately I was like, wow, if I come here for college, I can take a photo class. And he was like, yes, you can, absolutely. And of course, at that time, I was still intending to go to their engineering program, and I started dutifully kind of going to those classes. But he said, well, if I give you a sort of a little bit of a scholarship, I think it was like a couple of $100 or something like that. If you put together a little portfolio of artwork that you have, I can see if I can get you a little bit of scholarship. And I was like, oh yeah, extra money, that would be great. So I handed my little drugstore photographs, and I guess he was looking at them as sort of this type of a recruitment type of thing. And so he said, congratulations, you got this scholarship, but you have to declare your major as an art person, which originally I wasn't intending to. I was like, well, I can kind of take some art classes and still do engineering. But then I had to officially sort of declare art major. So he got me that way.
Yeah. You want money? Yeah.
And ultimately I did. That was, I still think, the time when I was kind of considering doing the double major, which, yeah, some people succeed, but being an educator myself now, I know that practically most of the people can survive that, just not really well. You kind of, it's like that myth about multitasking, right? You can accomplish more than one thing at the same time, just not really well. So I ended up switching more and more to the side where photography was, and what actually my first class was painting, and I never painted in my life before then, but I had to go through the first painting class. So I think I did okay. I was probably better at stretching the canvas rather than painting. But that was that mechanical part of me that sort of remained. And so the science part, science kind of was relatively easy to me. I liked biology always, but I was more of a technical person. I sort of can easily kind of relate to mechanical things,
Yeah. I see a parallel. And I'm kind of curious how that manifests itself. I see it in a lot of people. This kind of, because if you're actually processing your own film, working with chemistry and working with a machine in general, in order to kind of produce an image, you are kind of in some ways kind of engaging a very technical side of yourself. The expressive nature is the artistic expression. And, you have a whole bunch of art theory that says, that photography isn't art, but then you have a whole other group saying, no, it is. And so, but I think the reason is because it blurs that line, of the technical, the scientific aspect of this particular medium as its own kind of thing, So I was just kind of with you. I was just very curious because you had mentioned it early, and then we have one project we're going to look at that is very, it's very, scientific in a way, but I've always thought like a lot of renderings in science, even architecture. You look at some of those renderings and those drawings that they do. Yeah, wow, you're like just unbelievable. So like I don't know. I'm just curious, like that kind of blend. And so you got coaxed into being an artist. You get pulled and pulled and pulled into it, and you finally are like, I'm a photographer. Let's do this, right? And so,
Yeah.
so you got your degree in that. So talk to me a little bit about that progression in your art. How did you continue
Mhm.
to kind of push yourself, and what subjects were you kind of drawn to? And after that, did that pull you into maybe a master's? And talk to me a little bit about all that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
There's a lot
So,
in there.
um, it was I really credit a lot of my dedication to this to general atmosphere of that place. It was a
Okay.
small program that only had about 8 teachers, 8 professors, and a handful of us. Half of the program was probably like graphic design, as most of those types of small state schools have, because most of the students kind of, even in visual arts, sort of declare for these applied arts, something that's practical, right? So it's kind of a balancing between sort of the desire to be, to be an artist, and also kind of have that direct path to career, right? I was on the other end because I was kind of looking at with the we were in a really nice community of people who were really creative. This tiny little program in Louisiana, relatively speaking, produced a lot of people from my generation that ended up going directly to grad school. Um, and at that time, so this was kind of late '90s, we were all really kind of interested in sort of having this really great, I wouldn't even say competition, but support team. And I think that for certain kind of artists, being myself, was really something that helped me uh, really kind of continue on. So I ended up taking fairly quickly my 6 classes in photography, and that's really all there was. You could take some independent studies and those types of things, but I ended up taking a lot of ceramics as well. So I ended up doing kind of a double track of ceramics and photography. Uh, I found that both relate very easily to process. Process is something that I was kind of really interested in. And the type of ceramics that I was making was primarily kind of figurative, small figurative, uh, kind of narrative, dealing with some personal myths and these types of things. My photography at that time was really kind of echoing that. There was a lot of connection between the two. Actually, my final sort of exhibition in the undergraduate school ended up being a lot of personal images, a lot of images from Serbia that ended up being attached to the ceramic shapes of books. So these were wall pieces in ceramics that had liquid light emulsion attached to them, and so it was kind of a little bit of a sculptural, photographic, and very narrative process. I used to use a lot of text in my images, so almost like
That's awesome. I
but I
like
don't
that. Yeah.
think any of that work that exists anymore. But you know.
I'm listening to you, and I'm kind of curious. You got the art bug,
Hmm.
and you got the photography kind of in the veins. I can hear it. And so, talk to me a little bit about influences, like people that or artists that you connect to, or maybe you looked at and you were like, yes. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's the fun part, and you kind of end up discovering a lot along the way, right? I was trained sort of as a very much a here's a 4x5 camera, and the only f-stop you need to shoot on is f16. Just give me the longest depth of field there. But along the way, I really discovered a lot of people who were a little bit more gritty. For example, well, I was looking sort of at Edward Weston originally and all that when you were in undergraduate school. But then somebody like Joseph Kudelka comes through, and you realize like, wow, here's another person who has this kind of interesting immigrant story and connection to the long-term project, dedication to a kind of this place and this world, right? I really I still look at I'm still really kind of maybe old fashioned in that photographic terms, that the people who really inspire me are the ones that you kind of think of like how amazingly stripped down this image is, and it really is just like just the Cartier-Bresson of all the things, right? It's that moment without many technological aspects that are adding to it. So those guys, this is of course, like, we're talking now about photography that's 50, 60, 70 years old, right? But in a lot of ways, I think that they structured the universe of photography, if we're talking about specifically photographic terms, and influenced it in a really interesting way. And
Yeah.
argue, and of course we have new influences, and I look at I was also in grad school really inspired by Park Harrison's and even Andreas Gursky, who was really at the top of his game at that time. But you were kind of looking at something that what is that essence of the photographic image? Sebastião Salgado is somebody that I can spend just a whole day looking at the Genesis book or something, or any of his workers, or Graciela Iturbide, something that's kind of this again distilled to an image that happens in front of the photographer, that's captured, and that has that kind of direct meaning. I don't know.
Yeah, I love that. Graciela, I saw a great exhibition here in Paris of her. And I don't know that I had ever discovered, maybe I had, I just hadn't seen it like that. I was like, wow. Yeah, she's wonderful. The early stuff I think is like probably my favorite, of course. She got really big, and then then she was doing all of this traveling. But it was really, really powerful work. So talk to me about the work that you like, that you feel drawn to make. Talk to me about the subject matter, and then we can take a look at some. So this
Yeah.
will serve as our little setup before we jump in.
Well, before I have to qualify myself. I always think that there are artists who discover a direct track of things and become really, really great at what they do and are known for that. And I'm the other kind. that that tries to renegotiate periodically and maybe even at the same time a different way of expressing something. Um, so my work really ranges anywhere from constructed image to really, and we won't see too many constructed images except the bio ones, um, all the way to very documentary type of an approach. And that sort of remained with me in a way that, you're kind of thinking about what is the best approach for this concept or this story that I'm trying to say. Sometimes it's a use of different cameras. Sometimes it's a use of uh, of different sort of altogether a different making process. And I think I don't think I will ever really settle on sort of having this very distinguished or distinct, not a distinguished, distinct, specific way of doing things. Because for all of my projects, it's kind of a different thing. So the the people that inspire me are sometimes doing something that pushes the envelope of the actual photography. Um, and as I already mentioned, some of those are very very traditional people, but some of them are kind of in this idea of you know transformation of the place, right? And those types of artists who are kind of venturing outside. They're artists using photography. They're not necessarily photographers. I look at a lot of people like Mishka Henner and Trevor Paglin and those kind of guys, and people in general that tend to really think about what is photographic image today. What does it represent? And I'm endlessly fascinated with teaching photography in the age, or let's pull back, teaching or discussing something that virtually everybody can do it.
Yep.
We all have these wonderful devices in our pockets, that are just, anybody has a camera now. And
You don't even need a camera anymore.
right, it's really fantastic
Yeah.
because, as I said, like, my first cameras were these used 35 millimeter, mechanical cameras from Russia. And now you're walking around with a camera. What do you do
In
with
your
it?
pocket. Yeah.
Right. It just kind of changes the orientation of understanding how you relate to the medium, which I don't think it's true with a lot of our media as an artist, and also a lot of things that we relate to. A sculptor will still sculpt an object, or at least space. Painter will most definitely relate to what some kind of a flat surface. And us photographers, we are literally have gone from this process in which you are allowing the light to change the material, and then you are further transforming that material in the darkroom to something that becomes kind of an image that's gonna be used for a couple of seconds and then thrown away. So I think I'm excited about that. Photography to me is an endlessly changing medium, especially because now everybody has it.
Yeah, that's really interesting to kind of even think about. I had literally my last episode. We're recording this months in advance, but my last episode was talking to an artist who was a photographer, videographer. Well, made videos as well, but but he became like really famous because of AI art
Right.
and what he was doing. Boris L. Dagson.
Right.
And yeah, he was somebody that I just had a conversation with. I did my research on him and this idea of what is an image, what makes an image, what in the time of this inundation of imagery in the world, what is the validity of an image anymore? It used to have an impact, you know. They used to. Some people were scared of the daguerreotypes at the time because they were like, you captured someone's soul in that thing. What did you do? Like, you know, it's like it had this mystical aspect to it, but now they're so commodified, it's ridiculous. One of the things that inspired this show was the idea that, you know, we're about to be inundated by images. And I read this stat that 1.4 trillion images are uploaded to social media every year. And that number just keeps going up. And now we have artificial intelligence that's now rivaling the quality that we can't even tell anymore what an authentic image is anymore. That number is probably going to go even further up. And at that, you know, so many of us as artists of the medium of photography, we actually are thing that we do as artists in photography is we play with the indexical value of the machine. It's indexical by nature. It captures a moment. It's if you were to take it at face value, you could say that that is an authentic moment taken at a particular time and date. But as an artist, we play with that and we mess with that and we say, is this true? Is this not true? What is this? You know, and that's what we do, right? And now we have AI doing that for us. And so many people have still kind of, I don't know if so many people nowadays believe this, but I just think as a society, we're not prepared for the very fact that we're about to be inundated by a whole bunch of imagery that is not indexical by value and is a complete fabrication. And we haven't been really taught how to be image literate in a way that could actually help us kind of navigate this new world we're in. And so I started the show because of that. And I hear you kind of have the same fascination. And you said Trevor Paglen. Yeah. I remember reading him in my research when I was studying for my master's, AI images and stuff. He had a very interesting project, and so I hear you kind of playing with that. So do you feel like that also what drives your work? That kind of fascination about that image? Do you feel like that's a kind of an undercurrent?
I think in a lot of ways now
it is. It's recent.
I'm almost like going back and forth and sort of like, I don't know that particular thing influences every single sort of line through or every single sort of a series that I do, but in a lot of ways, maybe does even the opposite. And I'm sure I'm not going to be the first one to say this, that like, well, there's an intrinsic value of this image because it was created at the location by, you know, the electrons and or even by the chemical reaction that happens on a film, if it's not a, you know, sensor.
Yeah.
And it's sort of how do you kind of really process that in your mind is not something that, as I mentioned already, I'm really attracted by process. And so for a huge part of my work, I was really, even with the digital stuff, I was really interested in taking, you know, 20 images of a location and then stitching them by hand, even though, you know, PT Guy or like all those, the software for stitching already existed. But I was really particular. It was important to me as the author to actually go through the process of making things last longer in the making of the images, if that
Makes
makes
sense.
sense.
No, it does. There is a in to your point there,
Mhm.
I think, because of the world we live in, so many people are going back to film
Yeah.
for that reason.
And that's
It's that important to get to it, to what it is. Um,
yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. We might even have a movement against digital photographers, the purist, movement or whatever it is. But who knows what'll happen. But we have let's jump into some of your work. I think we have danced around it long enough. Let's jump right in and kind of see your world. I'm really excited about it. So let's do that.
So for the first group, I'm going to share something that's kind of a long through line of the images that I've made in uh, Serbia around my city. It's kind of uh, an idea that you're always kind of going back, and this was probably the first body of work that I started consciously kind of organizing out of the photographs that I took on occasion. So uh, this is not one of the images that I consider being a part of it, but this is kind of after the bombing of Serbia in 1999. And this was one of those images that when you take it, and this doesn't come around very often, but when you take it, you know immediately that if you're successful at developing the sound, you're going to have a really good one, right? And so I keep kind of looking at this sort of as a relate sort of relation to those very painterly images, right?
The tension in this image is unbelievable.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, you're exactly right, and of course you composed it properly. But wow, like you do not expect that behind a beach scene or like a day out. Whoa.
Yeah, so this was fairly. I mean, this was at the second part of my. This was a part of my thesis for a graduate school. So I
Wow.
was working on. This was the summer between my second and third year, and so
We
I've been.
didn't talk about that. Where did you go? Where did you go to your grad school?
I ended up going to Arizona State University, which was
Oh,
also
cool.
a fantastic thing that I applied to, and I applied to several graduate programs, but Arizona reached back, and I realized, wow, I'm going to study with Bill Jenkins and Mark Klett and Jim Hychak. Like these, yeah,
He's
amazing.
Well, Arizona State's a good school. I've heard that's a really good state school. So, yeah.
Uh, and Stephen Mark. So those were all my sort of photographic forefathers.
Wow.
So it came out. This was one of those images, one of those sunny days in the summer, and on the banks of Danube in my hometown, right? But you immediately kind of got that sense that I infused this not so much politics into this work, but more of a sense of history, I think. So this was sort of the beginning of kind of understanding what's going on. And I like this kind of slice of life slash um slash and slice um the idea that there is this kind of sort of surreal image, even though it's perfectly fine documentary image. So this is one of my oldest friends, Peter singing. I can't remember what we were singing. We were after a few drinks, he decided to climb on his brother's car, which he still hears about.
What would you do that for? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you can see kind of the dirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ugh.
Poor
um,
guy.
and so this kind of became, as I went along, more and more sort of this commentary about this place that um, exists after the framework of the country that it belonged to sort of falls apart, right? And so it's a lot of these remnants of culture that exist between East and West. I feel like I'm normalizing it as well, but I also want to point out these. So this is a Republic. This is American jet that was given to Yugoslavian army after the Second World War. But it has these uh, communist sort of markings and in socialist Republic of Yugoslavia. So I like those connections that are kind of crossing the borders between the two worlds. And I feel like a lot of Balkans is in that situation. It existed always as a kind of a span between those uh, two sort of visual cultures, but also two um, not two. I mean, there's a lot of different cultures, but general kind of separation of the.
Yeah, it was this. I had another artist on this Stakle, and he talked about that in Latvia. And
Yeah.
so the after the fall in the 90s, I think it was like right in there. You had basically the entire social structure that was supporting that town just disappeared. And
Right.
so you were in this weird state of trying to reinvent yourself, you know what I mean, or this country was. And so you have all these leftover remnants of a society, but also this kind of new era coming in. It was, I bet it was really strange. And then living in that and then fighting over certain areas, like
I
it was that probably had to be difficult. Or did you understand what was going on?
I
Did you
did.
understand it or no?
I spent a lot of time at the time kind of looking at. I wasn't growing up in Serbia, in Novi Sad. I wasn't necessarily paying a lot of attention to politics leading up to it, but once I was in undergraduate, especially graduate school, I really started reading into a lot of that history, a lot of kind of the understanding. There was a wonderful book that talks about uh, I, it's by Robert Kaplan, I believe, Balkan Ghosts, and he's a journalist who kind of traveled through that area. And the book starts with this kind of interesting thesis that all of the entire region of Balkans, which includes also Greece and all of these like Eastern, Central Eastern European countries, that at certain point in time, um, one of those countries was dominating, or one of those nations was dominating, sort of the entire area. For Serbia, that was like Middle Ages and back. It was like at the time that they were kind of covering, and so it lasts maybe a century or so, But what it ends up being is that the entire identity of that nation forms behind that historical event or the historical era. So there are stories about Grand Serbia, there are stories about Grand Turkey, stories about Grand um, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary. All of those nations have kind of anchored their identity to a historical point where they were the most dominant force, right? And so obviously there's going to be a lot of overlap with that. And a lot of, in a way, fallacy, because ultimately, at this point, um, that doesn't exist anymore. But there is still kind of this idea that maybe not with the youngest folks, but during these wars that were happening in the like early 21st century, and especially during the 20th century, that was the driving force. And it's interesting, we're staring at this image the longest, and it's just kind of one of those little tiny detail images, because it does say, I thought it was fascinating because it says smoking allowed here. So you have to actually have it's sort of the opposite from what you would expect in other places,
especially in America. Yeah, because smoking is not allowed anywhere. Yeah.
Well, having an actual sign that somebody went and designed and printed to say allowed smoking to me becomes kind of a really humorous part of this. And I like these celebratory times. Here's somebody who's really doing karaoke with Sweet Child of Mine. He was really getting into it. And of course it was all in Serbia. And then remnants of many different wars.
Lawn art. Look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's fascinating.
So this is actually by a small regional landing strip, not even regional, just a sort of local landing strip that's used mostly for like airplanes for the spraying of the fields, and I think there's also a parachuting club that kind of takes off from this place.
Wow.
But that's where that Republic Thunderjet was also located. So it's all of these kind of like almost the ephemera of wars that doesn't exist necessarily in the United States. Yeah, sure. When you drive on a highway, you see like you see the jet kind of sort of place there, kind of the home of the Blue Angels or whatever, right?
Oh, yeah.
Thing, right? But it's not like this. It almost every place has these like leftover.
You think about like I'm in France now, but France has always kind of been in this kind of area,
Yeah.
And so, but it grows and then it shrinks and then it grows and then it shrinks, and then there's a lot of that happening even, in the middle. And imagine all those countries in there on the margin that are always in conflict as these new powers move in, take over, then disappear, and they move back and forth. And that's what it's kind of reminding me of. It's like these countries on the margins that are always, in the middle of conflict for some reason or another. And they have these little histories as they go by, and the populations there are kind of just collecting war memorabilia in some ways, to kind of, it's just really interesting. I think I don't know that I have thought about it like that. Because in America you have that luxury. I think once America had that once they became like kind of the United States, and they kind of started breaking up away from Spain and buying from France, and then also in those English territories and stuff, it kind of solidified, and nothing really moved too much, and so it's like to kind of think about the still even, kind of going on over the last 200 years, there's that generational knowledge and trauma, that kind of comes up through these regions. And it's interesting, you're capturing it in your camera, and you're kind of reflecting on that. So when you look at that, are you kind of reflecting on your own childhood and these like histories and stuff? I think you kind of pointed to it to a degree. When you look at these, what are you getting?
Well, it's a number of things, right? And maybe I overthink these things, but in a lot of ways, when I start talking about this body of work, I usually say, like, well, balkanization is an actual geopolitical term that describes many warring nations that kind of fall apart from the larger whole. And that geopolitical term is crafted out of our situation. So you become known for certain, as a nation, you become known, or as a geographical location, I guess, you become known for something that's kind of negative.
Yeah.
And so that's a part that's kind of interesting, and I try to find dark humor in it in a lot of ways. But at the same time, I think of my parents' generation, and they are born in that kind of almost for half of their life lucky, but for the second half of their life unlucky space, where they were in a model of a new nation that was created post World War II and Yugoslavia, and it was this kind of celebrated unity of the nations that in the past were at each other's throats. And then, of course, it only took geologically a blink of 50 years for that to start, falling apart again. But for somebody who's born during the stable era, it becomes their identity, right? And so it's sort of like a lot of things that are happening today in a lot of ways is, we sort of almost can't avoid talking about politics. But if something like these events happen to you, the first effect is a loss of gravity. It's somebody like pulled the rug under your feet. And some generations respond to it in a sort of much more adequate way than others. And I think those are all the thoughts that really kind of go through my mind when I'm photographing this, because I'm also observing it from this is also like a reference to Robert Frank, but like as somebody who loves this place but is no longer off the place. And it's always going, I'm always going to kind of maintain slightly my immigrant persona into United States, but I definitely no longer fit into Serbia. So you're kind of in this perpetual immigrant space,
Yeah, it's that's a kind of I consider myself a kind of immigrant, an expat, an expatriate or whatever. And so like that is a weird feeling, isn't it? To kind of like that is where I'm from and I'm reflecting on that, but it's also like not who I am anymore, So especially language changes it too for you too.
Yeah.
And the way people speak and everything. And I'm lucky I get this podcast that I get to kind of maintain my my English, but I'm very French now. But with that kind of like reflecting on that, I think that's interesting to kind of see you doing that and kind of using the camera to kind of reflect. Now, when you were taking these images, you said 2001, you were already in America, right? Or were you traveling back and taking photos?
Yes, almost every summer. So
okay, so you're going back regularly.
Regularly, yeah.
Oh, wow.
My family is still there, and so I don't quite make it every summer, but almost every summer I photograph these. So this is a continuing body of work. Some of these are, most of these are actually 2005 and on.
Okay.
So after grad school, once I kind of had a job and stabilized and sort of started going back, and also like these were probably the least sort of dependent on the process. right? I think of these. I spent some time talking about the process, but in a lot of ways, these were taken with the available digital camera at the time because of the ease of travel and the ease of sort of snapping off images. So that's also kind of what, in my mind, changes their sort of not the not the way that I was taking them, but also that the fact that I could conveniently kind of blend in, almost
Yeah,
as a
for sure.
instead of setting up like a large view camera.
It's no, it's I was curious what you were like about that, if you were maintaining your film practice or if you were doing digital, or and at that it really doesn't matter to me too much. I know process is important to you, so I didn't know if that was very much a part of the process.
A part of this was, well, at the same time I was photographing a lot of as we talked about, a lot of panoramas
Yeah.
um, that um, that were stitched kind of by hand and blended in sort of with the through Photoshop. But then I I started selecting these images that were kind of like a parallel body of work with them. These more sort of these occasional images. So this is my dad grilling sort of obscene amounts of meat over here, which I love that. I love
It's not obscene. It is perfect. This is exactly the way it should be. I'm Texan, so this is a good spread here. It's a good spread. Yeah.
in the variety, yeah. Um, but I also love that he's wearing Crocs.
So it's current then. This is current or recent, maybe.
Yeah, this is probably about 10 years ago.
Okay. I guess Crocs were a thing then.
Yeah.
Yeah. That became a phenomenon. Everyone was wearing them, and I was like, "Come on, guys! Yeah, you can't wear those to work." Yeah, yeah. You're wearing a tie and Crocs. What's happening? No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, it's great stuff. And I there's a very human feeling to this. It almost feels, in some of these images, it feels like they could almost be anywhere.
Yeah.
With barring, of course, the language, and when you see the text and stuff. So is that kind of what you're trying to
Yeah.
capture? Go ahead.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, this is the most personal body of work that I've done and I continue to do. And of course, it kind of has this idea of the this should be just off recognizable, just like so relatable, but having you kind of go like, wait, this is not here,
Yeah.
where here is, right? Because I wanted that. It's not so much attention, I guess. I wanted that like visual sort of curiosity and confusion, I think.
Interesting. Because like if you were just kind of looking at you couldn't tell, it seems like the countryside of in a lot of places. And so like I didn't know if that was really important for you, and what do you think that means to you? Have you thought about that yet? Have you kind of like tried to analyze that? I'm curious.
I think to me, the rationale behind that is kind of understanding that I'm photographing a place in transition, and in a lot of ways that next year I'm not going to be able to make these photographs, or the 5 years later or 10 years later, right? And I am old enough that my dad has passed now, right? So these are also like personal images connected with that kind of transition of my life, but it's kind of wild because in a lot of ways, as I was saying, I separated from that culture fairly early on when I was 17, 18. Of course, at that time you kind of keep going back and you're kind of retaining your friendships and all of that. And sort of culturally, there was this divide that, uh, particularly in pop culture, there's different cars, different. Of course, these are surface things, right? But also like the way that people look at things. And now, because of this kind of generational differences, like those differences are getting smaller and smaller. So you are in
True.
Balkans and everybody's speaking English, and it's no longer this kind of like all of the Western tourists are going there because like it's kind of interesting that this was sort of a bubble that's now closing or
Interesting. Yeah.
disappearing, right?
Yeah, that I've part of the conversations I have is this homogenization of
Mhm.
the Western cultures. It's like, or Western influenced cultures, and you can associate a couple of things, maybe globalization of industry, or you could also say social media and TikTok is we're all watching the same things and doing all the same dance videos. You know what I mean? Which I still I thought I would get away from the random people dancing in the streets. No, it still happens here, but at a way they're just doing it with French music. I'm just like, stop it! I don't want to see you dancing on the metro. But to your point, there is this shortening of the differences, this shrinking of the differences that is happening, and it seems like you're kind of noticing that, but also still kind of
Mhm.
creating your own kind of your own language, but it's almost a universal. I don't want to call it universal, but you kind of have this. Like, I feel like this is my family. We would cook exactly like that. You're welcome. And when I go back to Texas, you can come. We'll have that huge pile of meat the same way. Okay. And my dad will probably be wearing Crocs. But anyway, but with that being said, it's really, really interesting.
So it's what's interesting in a lot of ways that the way that I structured this work, and you can kind of see it on my website, is thinking about the moments, and this photograph reminded me after we were talking about that, is that a lot of parts of my family were actually those kind of people who left during the 70s, like these aunts and uncles. And this was my aunt, and actually worked in Western Europe. So talking about sort of like that idea of this living and working somewhere else as a expatriate. These were it wasn't the same kind of idea of thinking about that, but in a lot of ways, these were the people that ended up kind of working and sending a lot of money back, because they always thought, we're going to come back to Serbia, we're going to retire here, right? So all of these photographs are actually taken during the summer, where you have really hundreds of thousands of people kind of coming back and sort of living their best life. So in the background of these images is that socioeconomic kind of understanding that, like, a lot of these people are going to leave in September, August. Well, not August is pretty vocational kind of time season, but in September, and go and work in a foreign country and maybe not be best with their language and all of that. So I take photographs
That's
of
really interesting. Greece is like that. People from Greece, since the crash that they had, the economic crash, there a lot of people are doing that same thing. That's interesting.
Poland, Serbia, Croatia.
Oh yeah.
It's not just a brain drain; it's also a skill drain.
Yeah, total.
people who are going to the Western Europe and working. And so these types of images of this like idyllic, so somebody sat there and drank beer, and of course, because it's Balkans, they didn't pick up behind themselves. There's also these wild swans in Danube that you would think like, how crazy magical is this? And I've been looking at these contrasts maybe most of the time through these images. So this is one of those images that was kind of stitched together. That still kind of plays. I still feel like it works with this group of images. But yeah, to get back to that idea of this kind of background of state that's sort of spilling out its sort of young force, and then you got people coming back, and it's a kind of an interesting thing. And I like these implied narratives that come along with the previous photograph and with this photograph. And so I just, this was one of those photographs that I had to take because we were cooking, and a friend of mine, Militza over here, she was cutting onions. So this is not a weird thing, right? But it has this implication of like this like teary kind of happy feeling to it.
Yeah.
Strange. But I was like, oh wait, this is a photo,
With the flash.
Yeah, with flash. Very much that. And so Novi Sad is a place of this like very big summer festival called Exit Fest, and it's a lot of people from England, from Central Europe. Tons of people come over here and listen to a lot of bands on the old fort, and this kind of became a part of that. And then you have these dogs that are just roaming the city.
Wow, it's really interesting to kind of look at it. It's like you are you're connected, but you're connected, but you're reflecting, I think. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting to kind of hear that story. And it's interesting that, like I was talking about these countries on the margins between the two big, nation states or whatever. Right. And so how a lot of them, because of these rapid changes all the time, they're losing their young people, and a lot of their brain drain, their skills drain, all that stuff. But it's also interesting to kind of hear you reflect on the people like not wanting to lose that part of themselves, so they still come back and engage with the family that's still there, and that's really quite it's quite fascinating. When do you think you'll be done?
Oh, that's always a question, right?
Do you want this to kind of be one of those things you always do, and you always, it gives you a reason to always go back,
It's probably going to be done when I kind of run out of things to photograph this way, right? It's probably going to be done realistically, kind of when I lose more contact with the people. It's I'm expecting things to kind of happen sort of organically. Sure. With a lot of my work. The only
happen. Yeah, all these happen anyway. So, yeah.
The projects that I sort of successfully completed were the ones that either like the process was no longer available, speaking of process, or or I kind of published the book, and that sort of created sort of parentheses on it. So that's
Huh. It's awesome.
So I'm still
So we
looking
have a few more minutes to kind of check out some of the other work that you
let's
have.
move
You
on.
go a completely different direction than this for our next body of work. And it is when I was referencing more of a scientific approach. That's what I was referencing. Why we got into our previous conversation.
Right.
You ended up doing this next project. It's suburban. Come on, Patrick. Symbiosis. Yeah, suburban symbiosis. I'm like, I don't have my notes here. So, but this is a wild deviation from it, from what we were just looking at. A more documentary, very reflective on one's origins and one's past, and this one is. It seems like the epitome of curiosity.
Yeah.
So talk to me about this project. We'll go ahead and flip it up here. Let's go ahead and throw it up here, and you talk to me about this one.
Yeah. So this is the project that you were referring as a wild sort of divergence from the previous ones. This, in short, kind of came about when I moved to North Carolina, and as any university kind of functions, you have these open houses with the various different things. And so this was an open house for the biology core imaging lab. And this became my tool for the next 8 years. This is the scanning electron microscope. And so this actual unit over here is the chamber in which you kind of place the specimens, and then you bombard them with electrons, and you kind of construct the image that's a really high fidelity because it's recording the reflected electrons off of a segment off of a specimen, right? So for about a year, I didn't really have anything to say with it. I knew it was available to me to sign up for the time in the lab and go and use it. And then I started thinking about how am I going to describe this landscape around where I am, right? Around this rural North Carolina town. And I realized that I started seeing a lot of the sort of the reflections of the landscape in form of insects and other arthropods entering my house. I was living on this like very newly constructed duplex home when we moved here, and it was really kind of plopped in the middle of the rural land. It used to be a field, agricultural field. So we ended up having a lot of these insects that I ended up collecting around and placing them on this specimen tab, as you can see here, and then imaging them pretty quickly. So the black and white image is from the scanning electron microscope. You can see how many wonderful details you can get out of that. And pretty quickly, I realized that I can actually combine. Scientists usually use what's called false color to kind of quickly color the parts of the scanning electron microscope image to differentiate from different parts of the insect, for example. And I decided, because I was a photographer, to create a whole another set of images with the color, with the optical microscope, and then combine the two into this constructed image. So these became sort of the portraits of my roommates or neighbors as a reflection of the landscape that we are occupying.
Wow.
So that's kind of where that idea came from.
So were you just like, you were like, well, number one, bugs are a big deal. Or are you living in I think Eastern Carolina or North Carolina? You're in the woods there, aren't you? You're up in the mountains?
No, it's more of a sort of a coastal plain with a
Okay,
lot of
I wasn't sure where. Yeah. Okay, okay. Oh well,
right. Yeah.
Eastern. Yeah, on the coast. Okay, okay, okay. Sorry, North Carolina. I apologize.
That's
But yeah, and then the Western is all. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now I get the pirate reference. Yeah, I appreciate it. All right. So you're being inundated with bugs, and you're like, what a subject here.
yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so you were kind of pushing it and trying to be a little bit more photorealistic in the color. And wow. So with this project, were you at all like what kind of kept you going with it? You said 8 years you've been kind of playing with just.
Yeah. This was one of those fortunate things that, well, first of all, it was the time when a lot of exhibitions were advertising sort of the art and science kind of connection,
Yeah.
and so my work felt like it really belonged in that way of presenting and talking about the art, right? And for some reason, I mean, always been interested about environment, and as you'll see from the next body of work that kind of deals with environmental changes in Louisiana. So these were really kind of images that were true collaboration with a scientific process, because I had to go online and sign up for the lab time, and then there was a director of the lab that I quite often relied on for either identification of these little guys that I found, or I got in touch with some scientists from NC State, which is in Raleigh, and kind of started working and having a dialogue with them, because scientists always like somebody who's not always, but in general, they enjoy somebody who's kind of visualizing data in the
Yeah.
world.
They need it.
Yeah.
They need you. Yeah.
And the way that I was photographing them, I literally had these like micro LEDs that I could kind of move around on goosenecks and orient, because I really wanted these particular insects and arthropods to have personality, to have sort of this this distinguished feel. And I started really looking at a lot of Northern Renaissance, a lot of like this line work from Netherlands and from Flemish artists, and so here's a really kind of nice example of the Rubens portrait of a young man, which became really something that was driving this body of work. So this is one of those groups of images that started off very fortuitously through my through the availability of the process, right? And as I kind of went along, I picked up a lot of motivation for it. I picked up a lot of way of presenting it as I learned how to use the equipment, right? This is one of the later pieces that becomes, I think, sort of better and more expressive. And then I realized I really want to look at these as anthropomorphic as possible, because in my mind they represent the environment that we are sort of occupying, and then at the same time the articles, because I tend to do a lot of research when I deal with any subject, right? So the articles about the disappearance of the insects started showing up. So the insects, even though they're not that charismatic megafauna, are super important to our ecosystem, and without them, the ecosystem collapses. And so, like, a lot of this stuff was my way of sort of giving the honoring these creatures, right? that were surrounding us.
Wow.
So that's kind of, and then eventually I was approached by a publisher, and which was another crazy, lucky thing, which propelled me to do, because I was kind of winding down. You get to a point of, okay, I have like 35 portraits, right? How many do you need, right? Because you can keep going. But if you,
Of course, yeah.
at a certain point, you have proven the point, right? Or something like that. But then a publisher says, and comes in and says, well, we need about 60 for a book, right? And so then hey, give me a year and I'll keep cranking these out, and then you'll have selection of these, right? So that was about 2000. Oh, sorry, 2018, and the book finally came out in 2020.
Oh wow.
And so it was a really fantastic experience, and I kept kind of producing these, and I sort of started doing these double portraits, also kind of inspired by some Renaissance paintings.
Yeah, there's it's almost kind of, they have this alien appearance to them, but you're lighting them as if they're portraits.
Yeah.
And so it's got this really kind of interesting appeal to it, although it's like still a bug, and so it still creeps me out a little bit. But at the exact same time, I'm like appreciating the approach in the composition and the and stuff like that. So it's quite interesting. What was there anything that was kind of shocking, or something that was cool that you discovered in the process of all of this stuff, like, beyond the result and the publication, the whole process of this? Was there anything that you discovered that was interesting to you?
Oh, I mean, the whole process is just phenomenal, especially for me, because it's kind of like staring at the fire, right? It's like you have this tiny little brown smudge, and then you place it under a microscope, and you start discovering all of these colors and details and fantastic. I mean, you can literally spend hours just observing it and not even taking an image. And because of the focal depth, right, these are also they fulfilled my process, my yearning for process, right? Because a lot of these are stacked focus. All of them are stacked focus. So you have to create probably anywhere from 12 to 25 different layers of the image, and then stack them together to get the depth that of focus that you're intending to get.
Wow. So like, help me with this process. Yeah. And so they're bouncing electrons off of something, and they're creating kind of a dot map in 3D. And is that what it's creating, and then making a 3D rendering? Is that kind of how it's?
No.
Or is it more optical? Talk to me.
Well, it's not optical technically, because it's because you're not dealing with photons, right? You're not dealing with electromagnetic spectrum. You're dealing with simply collecting electrons and particles that are bouncing off of the object. So it's almost like you're recording how should I explain? If you are you familiar with those like big pin cushion kind of sort of toys that you can like impress yourself on?
Sure, the little pins.
Yeah,
and you press your hand into it and it leaves an imprint. Yeah.
I think that analogy is actually closer than taking a photograph of them.
Yeah. I remember putting my face in that thing.
Yeah.
And pulling it out. And then I would think to myself, how many other people have done that? Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying there. It's just, I guess what I'm the electron process, and when you say stacked focus, I'm thinking instantly it's
Hmm.
optical. It's because it's the only thing that would need it. And when you're in a
Right.
micro, it's a very shallow
Right.
depth of field. And so like you're having to stack focus, which makes sense. And so I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, well, where's the electrons kind of play into it? Is it almost like an extra process that adds fidelity to the optical process?
So yeah, that black and white image that was created. So I would say that main of this image is the scanning electron microscope, right? And because it's transferring that information into a sort of visual image. Um, so you're not technically taking a photograph, but the result is a visual file.
Interesting. Yeah, and that's
Right.
kind of where I'm like getting mixed up, but it is not necessary. Uh, and it's I guess are the two processes meeting each other in post process?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so it's almost like high fidelity editing. Yeah, yeah. I'm sure you heard of that HD. And then you pull the texture out, and then you have this texture image, and then you have the image underneath for
Yeah, it
color.
starts with texture, and then I sort of map the color information.
In okay. Now I understand. Cool. Got it. I'm with you. I'm kind of I love that kind of stuff. I like editing in
Yeah.
that way. You can get really high quality images that way, and it's fascinating that they're kind of doing it in that regard,
Mhm.
and you got a book out of it, which is amazing. Was it successful? Was it highly? Well, talk to me about that. Were people really receptive of it, or like me? I'm not a
Yeah.
big bug fan, so I'm a little kind of like, you know what I mean? How was the reception to it?
I think that's kind of how it starts. Oh, I don't know what's going on here. This is just my camera, sort of.
Yeah, it's done that a couple times, but yeah, it's okay.
um, the uh, well, the book was released in March of 2020,
Okay.
so didn't quite get a chance to do a lot of publicity around it because we were involved with
Yeah, because that's exactly when everything blew up.
yeah,
Yeah, that was the exact month. Yeah,
absolutely.
fascinating.
But other than that, I mean, I was lucky to be published through a large publisher. So this was through Norton.
Oh, oh wow, yeah, it is. Yeah.
It's still available. I I don't know that it's everybody's cup of tea, but 10-year-olds love it.
I bet they do. Yeah. Well, anybody in biology or anybody
Yeah,
that's into
yeah,
that kind of stuff, and yeah, you know, I don't know that it would make it to Perry Photo, but they might. It might. I don't know.
right.
They'd sell that there. I bet you could have your own signing and everything. That would be amazing. That's but no, like I can. Those were the kind of books when I was 10 that I would pick up and go. You know, was it like when you were done? What? How did was it? Like you were like, yes. Did you feel like you contributed something, or like, how did that feel? What did it? Because
Yeah,
like it's such a deviation from what you do and what you teach. So it's like I'm sure if you're doing fine art photography, you know, you're kind of taking it a more conceptual. So what was it? What was it like to kind of finish that project and see it?
well, it was kind of as you might expect. Like the book process is like a lot of hurry up and wait, right? You're kind of like, oh, okay, let's here's the set of images that I would like to do, and then you're like, you don't hear anything from them, and then when they get back to you as a publisher, then they're like, okay, can you send us your essay, right? And then you wait for a couple of weeks, and then, oh, here's the editing. Do you agree with this, right? And a lot of that type of stuff. So in a lot of ways, by the end, you're kind of just relieved to receive your first, author copies of it, and then it's like it's such a finalized and tangible thing that it's a really great feeling, because
Yeah.
you're like, well, if I this is in my mind a very much a concrete kind of completion of that process, of that project, right?
What a privilege to be working with such sophisticated equipment. It's not like you could pick that up at an electronics store or anything.
No.
Hey, can I get your Electron camera, please? I have a project in mind. No, it's not like you have access. No one has access to that. So you really created something that's very unique. And I love how you kind of took your training and your sensibilities, the artistic sensibilities, even into the work. That's what makes it unique, and in that way you contributed, I think, something really to kind of furthering, imaging technology, but also, to that, to all the 10-year-olds out there, that are into bugs, there's other people too. They're not all 10. So I apologize to them and to North Carolina again. But with that being said, you have another body of work that you wanted to, when we were discussing at the beginning of this show, you were talking about maybe it's good to start here, but we're going to finish with it, which is something that's ongoing and it's kind of current. So take us into that, and we'll finish up with that project and kind of we'll just do that.
So this is kind of again a parallel to the Days of Summers Past, because it's kind of related to where I started, to my beginnings in Louisiana, and it's photographed sort of this is actually kind of a longest body of work that I've ever done, because it started in like around 2000 officially. So that part of Louisiana is this coast, as you can see over here. So I like this one a little bit more in the lecture-y way, because I can say, hey, this Homa and Thibodeau is right here. So this is where I landed originally as an exchange student. And all of this red is a total land loss that's projected into 2050. So Louisiana basically is losing about a football field of land every half an hour. So it's kind of this continuous process of just disappearance, right? I kind of framed it around these big land loss events, which are hurricanes, and also Deepwater Horizon. So originally, this is a Gustav in 2008. So you can see sort of the differences of the landscape. That's the same house that's on the beach, and then in 2017, completely in the surf. So I started photographing these kind of...
just to be clear, part of this is the land or the dirt or the sediments washing out into sea, and also sea level rise.
Yes.
A little bit of both, correct?
A little bit of both. Louisiana has an interesting set of problems, right? As you can see, that coast, they have a oil extraction, which subsides the land mass. So when you pull something out from underneath, it sinks, right? You have a water level rise globally, and you also have direct influence of hurricanes stripping the landmass and moving it around.
Yes, yeah, that's one thing that's kind of people don't think about,
And you got a couple of more other problems. You got basically since 1927, when Mississippi received levees because of the flood, the land mass that should be flowing through the silt from Midwest, that should be flowing through Mississippi and essentially populating with land this area, right? Uh, that doesn't happen anymore. So the silt is just shot into the Gulf.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's it's the Mississippi water basin down there.
Yeah.
And so that's where all the sediment from the central United States kind of settles down there, and
Absolutely.
it created Louisiana in that little area. So what you're saying is because of human intervention upwards, because of the levee, that resedimentation of the beaches is no longer happening.
Yes.
And so I gotcha. There's also another problem that happens too, outside of the levees too, is that all that trash that ends up in the river there ends up down in the coast, and then across all over the Gulf, and then all over the beaches down there too. So you have some rivers that kind of empty into that. They resediment, but they also resediment all the plastic from the center of the country. So there's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of things happening here. Okay. Wow. Okay. So I will let you.
Oh yeah. Continue. I mean, it's a very complex problem, and this is probably a book in the making.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So at the time, so this was around 2005, 2006, right after Katrina. I decided to construct my own pinhole camera because I started photographing with sort of a cardboard pinhole camera. And this turned out to be it. I played with some laser cutters and all of that. So for a big part of this series early on, I was using up the Type 55 Polaroid film. And this is what they looked like. So they were created at I still love pinhole. It's just kind of that sort of stripped down photography that it doesn't even use lens, right? It's like it's so direct, and it's created right at the location.
Yep.
So these images were the result of that.
Where were you using for the pinhole? It looked like one of those old Zeiss lenses.
That was just a shutter from Crown Graphic.
Okay.
I used a shutter just for the convenience, but the pinhole was like a traditional brass pinhole.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So this was the as we were there. So this came out of my connection with Louisiana and this annual week-long workshop that we did from one of the science centers down there. It's called Louisiana University's Marine Consortium. And at that time, they had a functioning darkroom. So me and my old professor from Louisiana and his colleague from biology, we would all go down there and kind of hold this workshop for other scientists and artists to take photographs in Louisiana landscape with concerns of environmentalism and those types of and cultural kind of connections, right? So while we were there in 2010, the first oil from the Deepwater Horizon started accumulating on the islands.
Wow.
And so these were the images kind of from that. So typically when I'm down there, some of these are barrier islands, some of these are internal sort of beaches and communities. I tend to revisit the same location over and over again. Not in the like absolutist way, kind of. I'm not setting up the camera in exactly the same way, but it's still kind of a revisitation and seeing the same kind of area go through the equivalent of a geological change within our few years.
Yeah, and it's so, I think it's really interesting, especially with a project that's looking at kind of the degradation of the landscape. I think it's important to go back over and over and over again to the same place and kind of document those changes. I think it's really quite interesting. And so you did it with Polaroid at first. Did you ever move to a large format film? Maybe
Yes.
this one?
Yes. It was a combination of things. So this is 2002, and I was photographing with 35 millimeter.
Okay.
Around 2005, so 2005 through 2011, I was photographing with those pinholes, which were 4x5s, but a Polaroid film, like this.
Yeah.
So you can see the difference between the location. That's the same location, right?
Yeah.
And after Katrina and Gustav, the land was sheared off. Basically, we lost about 6 feet of landscape there.
Wow, that's amazing.
Then 2008, getting closer to the water. By 2010, that first sort of camp structure was gone, and this is the remnant of it. And then in 2010, this is the white camp that was in the background.
Wow.
I also love that so these pinholes were taken over about 5 to 10 second exposures, right? So we've had that kind of really interesting record of time in a smaller scope that references, in my mind at least, this geological change.
Well, and this was 2011, and so like, how did you get Polaroid? They were starting to disappear around that time.
That's a good point. I had a batch basically, and I was just working through it.
Were you really?
Yeah.
Yeah. They're starting to come back. You can get them now. But and here you can. In Paris, it's just like the photographer's heaven when it comes to that kind of stuff. But
exactly.
But as far as that stuff goes, I think it's really interesting. And I like the process. What was it important to make your own camera? Why did you do that?
Yes, I definitely, it was out of pragmatic reasons. I wanted a really lightweight camera that wasn't, I didn't want to have to like set up a pinhole camera or set up a view camera every time I photographed, right? This is something that's kind of a sturdy box that can exist in these fairly rough conditions of wind and water and sand, right? The other reason was that it was just something that was really interesting to me about building your own equipment, creating your own camera that you will take your own photographs, because it lends itself to kind of giving you the idea of uniqueness of the image, right? So that was my engineering sort of side coming through.
Well, it's just why go through all the trouble, I think, is it's like that. And at that, it's not, number one, it's cool. I'm like, I think I can make one of those. I work on those little shutters. It's one of my little hobbies. It's like a little Welsh painting. I find them here really cheap, and I work them and fix them, and so, but anyway, it's kind of my little hobby. So I was like, ooh, I can make a little pin. But no, I think that's a really interesting, but for a project, and especially one like this, I feel like it's important to it. And so it's like, especially to go through all the trouble of doing it. I understand the practical aspect of it, having something that's already fixed focal length, it's going to work. You just pop it in. It's really easy. You probably even know the exposure times.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like super, super quick. And so I understand that. And, but also it could be just like, I like making things. I don't know. I was just curious. It feels like it's really important. So I'm trying to get to that aspect of it, I guess, is my question.
Well, I think, again, I photographed this place with the digital camera. I made some videos that were kind of interesting to me, at least. Almost music videos about this place, kind of abstract. But I settled on this process because it was really kind of interesting to and I'm talking about this process.
I
It wasn't
the
just
aesthetic. Yeah.
yeah, um, and it was imperfect, as you can see that there's a lot of like light leaks and all that, but it was also the fact that these were exposed and fixed images at the location. So these sort of had a little bit of that, you know, maybe a spiritual part of that island kind of remaining there. It's interesting. Just to backtrack a little bit, this set of islands, this Ile Denier, was actually a larger island that was occupied by a sort of summer resort back in 1800s, and then the hurricane of 1856 completely cut the island in half, and what you have left over here are sort of remnants of that. So about 200 people died in that event. This was an unnamed storm at that time. So you're dealing with this kind of layers of this past that you are sensing when you're at this location. It's almost like being on some kind of a, you know, some kind of a special ground in a. I hesitate to say it consecrated, but it's kind of like that type of a feeling, right? And I always keep that history in my mind.
Yeah, in the name of the island is perfect. Ile Dernier is the last island. So it's au revoir. Yeah. That's interesting. That's it. But I like how you keep coming back to this one like house. It's been abandoned, obviously.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? No one's going back there. But they also didn't even go through the trouble of taking it down either. So they're going to let the Gulf of Mexico claim it again, you know? And I just think that's really quite interesting. The aesthetic of that camera is quite fun. I like that a lot. I think it's really, really interesting. Are you gonna? Well, I have only seen, I guess with that camera, only Polaroids in there. Are you only doing Polaroid back on that? Are you doing anything else?
I did a few of the regular film, but by the time that I was I felt that Polaroids were even more successful with that little pinhole camera.
Yeah.
And of course, that took a break. This project took a break from about 2011, 2012 until I started using this is now the new camera that I'm using, and this is a medium format film. So this is 6x12 negatives. I was always attracted to that panoramic image. So this is a film camera. I still like the idea that it's shot in an analog form and then scanned. But it's in 2015 I started using the like a Horseman 612. And that's these images now.
Oh, okay.
So in the latest iteration of this project, as I kind of continue on, I started including some portraits of the people who lived there, and basically continue to photograph the same location over and over again, like every year that I go back. So I can kind of really, it's not about this comparison, but it's about this sort of transition, very similar in a lot of ways to the series from Serbia. It's kind of observing this kind of transitory a location that sort of is disappearing, and in like a direct reference in a way that kind of my country disappeared through political situations. This part of the land is sort of disappearing through, the force of nature and also human activity.
Wow. That one image where it showed waterline is so poetic. It's interesting because you think that these buildings are like rising, they're like lifting them, but no, they're probably exactly where they were before. But all the land is like disappearing, and so it's kind of changing the landscape. It's quite interesting. What do you, by observing this stuff, I'm sure you've learned some things. And so what do you feel like you've learned the most from this particular body of work?
God, yeah, that's a great question. In a lot of ways, I kind of, I don't want to dismiss it, but I kind of go and take these photographs in a sort of inertia way, and I don't mean that by an inertia being anything bad, but just by feeling that the call to kind of continue on and rephotograph. I'm still tied to the community. I have a lot of friends, so this kind of a annual trip to this place also serves as kind of reconnection to the community of Louisiana. As you know, as I started talking about how important some of the people were in my formation as an artist, right? So what I've learned is that in a lot of ways, well, you kind of go through actual kind of research behind this, and you sort of learn the facts and the numbers and kind of how it functions. But at the more essential level, you realize that we are good at sort of moving the land and building levees and kind of, you can rebuild a house, right? Even at that point, but you ultimately cannot rebuild a community that's been struggling with this landscape through decades. And I think that's the unfortunate part about this kind of a place, because practically, ultimately, the community is going to start dying out in this landscape when you move schools several miles up the road, right? When you move your grocery store 20 miles up the road where it's dry. And so the infrastructure is going back to that original camp, the infrastructure is going to just kind of essentially be reabsorbed by the landscape once the generations of these people are going to move out, or their kids are going to move somewhere inland for their own careers or their own lives. And so this type of landscape is going to continue permanently changing, even though there might be some efforts at like physically like rebuilding the coast, right?
Do you see the connection between your first body of work and this one?
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah. That's the connection right there. What you just said right there. Yeah.
And this is probably the best image to kind of close out on for this body of work.
Yeah, that connection that you were just, I saw it immediately. You were talking about these changing landscapes, whether it's socio-political or a hurricane, they can change the landscape. You know what I mean? And bodies and communities will be changed forever. And how that affects generations afterwards. I think it's really interesting that you are drawn to these places to kind of reflect on that. And you're kind of looking at it and seeing parallels thousands of miles away from each other. And, they are similar, but they are quite different, And so that's awesome. I think you should continue to do that. And go back to the last islands. I saw it was plural, so it's last islands.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's something else. So I just have one final question for you. It's the one that I ask everybody, and it's really kind of related because I have an audience of image makers and photographers out there, and you might actually be a great person to kind of talk to about this particular question, which is, as I wait, you're like waiting on pins and needles. Now, what kind of advice would you give people out there that want to be image makers themselves? What would you say to someone that is trying to be an artist or a photographer out there that wants to make their own work per se? I've also been adding a second question, just in case that one doesn't work for you. What would you tell your younger self to help you what kind of advice would you give your younger self? And it's more related to kind of get you to where you are today, if you feel like where you are today is somewhere you want to be. So I'll let you take one of those, and yeah, we'll finish out with that. How's that?
God, yeah, both of those are great questions. So what I would tell, and I do that. I try to. I guess the first one might be a little bit easier, just because I think I'm well exercised at still teaching my students. So I have a number of really kind of short advice to give if they're listening. Well, but I think what makes you it's really the adherence to kind of understanding yourself and really figuring out what your values are fairly early on. I'm a big proponent of that kind of self-awareness. How do you get to that? Should be through understanding, and this is clearly how I approach a lot of my students, education, and they probably roll their eyes because it's never ending, and I can keep going.
Well, life isn't. Life doesn't.
Exactly.
Of course. Yeah. Everyone wants this finalized answer, but it's not really. It's especially continue. You were about to nail it. So yeah, go on.
I didn't know that I was going to nail it. But
you're about to nail the landing, and I interrupt you. Do you go ahead? So
I think in a lot of ways, it's the fact that none of this is easy. If it's worth doing, it's probably not going to be easy. And it's not going to be easy is because to reach that self-awareness, you have to kind of really dig deep and analyze what's the context in which you're occupying this space, and this part of history. And I keep kind of telling the students and my colleagues and all of that, it's like, yes, we are struggling in a lot of ways, but so have the previous generations. And every time we kind of start making artwork, we should be really kind of thinking, what has led to me being here? And I think that's kind of, once you start thinking it and really kind of considering those things at that level, and maybe not relying so much on the power of social media and the algorithms that are continually regurgitating the same thing at you. Once you kind of start being self-aware and thinking originally, then you start really kind of making artwork that becomes interesting to, and it has kind of the staying power, right?
Yeah.
That's my complicated answer to that.
No, it's I appreciate it, and thank you so much for coming on. I think it was a great conversation. I think your nuggets of wisdom will help generations and anybody else that's trying to just keep going. I think it's good stuff. So this is the opportunity for you to kind of share with us how we can connect with you. You could share your website,
Absolutely.
You can also share if you have an Instagram. We can find you on Instagram or any social media platform wherever you're at. So this is where you can kind of share that detail.
Yeah, absolutely. Both are very easy. I have that kind of very peculiar last name. So it's danielkariko.com, DANIELKARIKO.com. And for the Instagram, Daniel Kariko.
Same thing. There you go. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. This was great.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I feel like we only scratched the surface. We even spoke for 2 hours today. So I sometimes go, I want more, and I definitely, in this case, I want to find out more. So people check out his website, dive into, especially that last project we were looking at. I wish we could have given more time. The kind of questions that pulls to the surface, I think, is super valuable. And I can't wait to see what you end up doing with that, whether it makes its way into a book or makes its way into an exhibition or whatever you decide to do with that. I'm excited to kind of see where that goes. So thank you again for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you so much.
Hey, to all those that have made it this far, thank you so much for joining us on the Urbanaut Podcast. If you like content like this, please like, share, and comment down below. We would love to engage with you down there. That also helps kind of promote this show to other viewers because the algorithm loves seeing people engage with your content. So please consider liking, sharing, and commenting. That's one way to support us. Another way to support us, if you really love us, is to consider joining our Patreon page as well. Become a paid subscriber there, as well as you can also become a paid subscriber on our Spotify. That's one way you can do it. And as always, we'll see you next time.